Welcome to Only Murders in My Mind, a Random Thought production. Hi, I'm Carol Bissett, a crime writer, and I invite you with my co-presenters, Liz Hedgecock and Mike Jackson, each week to our conversations on all things murderous. Hello everyone, it's Thursday, it's 5 o'clock and it's Only Murders in My Mind. And with me, as usual, I have my co-presenters, Liz Hedgecock.
Hello.
And Mike Jackson.
Hello.
I'm very good friends as well, I'd like to say. We're going to the pictures together eventually.
Are we? Well, we should definitely go and see Thursday Murder when it's out. We have to go to that.
Yeah, and then we can review it for you. So that'll be interesting. Yes, that was our topic last week. I hope you enjoyed it. And this one is a bit more highfalutin, if you like.
Well, let's see what we can do to change that.
Oh yeah, I'll bring it down to grass levels. It's poetry and crime. So
a strange one, this, because when we first thought, we always have these production meetings, we call them every now and again, and we were looking, because we've done a year's worth of podcasts, we were trying to find some different themes, and this one popped up. And you don't always associate poetry and crime, but actually once you delve into it, it was surprising just how many links there were. It surprised me just how much there was to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that, I mean, this isn't really crime, but it was The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, which is a poem which is haunting rather than, I know somebody dies in it.
Quoth the Raven.
Yeah, yeah. And after that, I struggled.
But before we start, I mean, the whole thing about poetry I find very strange. I'm very fortunate in my younger son went to East Anglia to do creative writing. So he's got a degree in creative writing. And he's been writing poetry. He's in his early 40s now, but he's been writing poetry since he was about 14 or 15.
Was he there when Andrew Motion was there?
Yes.
Yes. He came and did a talk at our university. He tried to recruit us all to his masters. We were like, we're already on a master's. He's like, never mind, just sack off and come to East Anglia.
But when I look at his poetry, I cannot understand it. The words are too long for me. But also because he thinks like a poet. I like things to be written in a certain way and formatted in a certain way. I suppose that's because I'm a writer. There's a certain way of formatting. With poets, they don't always use capital letters, or they format the lines so that one's over to the right of the page, one's over to the left, and the other one's 3 miles down the road. It's all very strange. And he tells me that I just need to be more open-minded.
Well, I think
he's right.
You're getting a book of E. Cummings for Christmas now. You know that.
Poetry is a bit like art, though, isn't it? It's what you like and what you
want. It's so subjective.
It is, yeah. And quite often, I mean, as a teacher, if you talk to young children, about writing poetry, their first thing is, I can't make things rhyme.
Yeah.
So many youngsters think that poems have to rhyme, and of course, they don't.
When I did poetry with mine, if the poem didn't rhyme, they were like, well, this isn't very good, is it?
Yeah, because that's what they're supposed to do.
Yes.
You used to do haikus, didn't you, and things like that?
I enjoy writing haiku. You know. But again, you see, there's the traditional haiku, which is 3 lines. First line is 5 syllables, second line 7 syllables, and the third line 5 syllables. But if you read some modern contemporary haiku, it doesn't follow that pattern. The only pattern it follows is the 3 lines.
Right.
The syllable count are usually much shorter than that.
Oh, and I remember posting a haiku in an online group, and somebody absolutely having a right go, being like, it doesn't have to be like that, and people misunderstand haiku and whatever. I'm not saying your poem bags. Actually, it's a decent poem, but people think they can write them and then they can't. I mean, yours is fine, but so, oh my gosh, won't do that again.
But haiku writing is great fun as an exercise, and I enjoy writing very short stories, so haiku suits me nicely.
You like those rules, don't you?
I think as a long form sort of person, haiku is not quite enough for me.
No, because I did the usual things at school and college, the usual poets. We did war poetry and those sorts of things.
I've got a friend of mine, David, who is, like myself, he's retired now, but he is a children's poet.
You hang around with a lot of poets, don't you?
I do, yeah.
You must attract them.
He was a children's poet, and he used to do lots
Some
of
sort
workshops.
poetic pheromone he's got.
Yeah.
Did a lot of workshops in schools teaching children poetry. And he and I now use some of the things that he did, some of the techniques he did, and we create teaching resources. But recently, David and I, it was mainly David, created a book which was called, it's about the 26 letters of the alphabet. And basically what he's done, he's written a poem for each letter of the alphabet where the letter itself is talking. It's explaining itself and its history. But he's done it in 26 different poetic forms.
That
So
takes some doing.
songain, sonnets, haiku, and then some forms I've
I don't think
never
I could
heard
name
about.
26. Never mind,
No.
write them.
I'll put a link to the book on
Ooh,
our
yeah.
podcast.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
cool.
That's interesting. I've seen this. You did a
Did a
talk
presentation.
on, and
Yeah.
it was really good.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it. So it was well worth seeing.
So, poetry and crime.
Yeah.
Poetry and
Where
crime.
do we begin?
Well, I'm going to begin with Oscar Wilde.
Ooh.
Yes.
Because he was in Reading jail. And he wrote a poem about a real life execution that he witnessed while he was in the prison. And it critiques the justice system and it explores the psychology of a condemned man. And it goes something like, there's part of it, I've got an excerpt here. Yet each man kills the thing he loves. By each let this be heard. Some do it with a bitter look, some with a flattering word. The coward does it with a kiss, the brave man with a sword.
Well, didn't Tom Jones do that when he, Delilah? He killed her. He was going to be hung, wasn't he? I'm dragging this back down now.
Well, no,
Not
because
at all,
but
no.
poetry, lyrics of songs, they all fall into that same category.
Yes. So does he talk about the crime at all, or is he talking about the...
I think it's more about the system and exploring the psychology of the condemned man rather than...
Yes.
Though I have to admit to having not read the whole poem.
And of course, he was in prison himself. Wouldn't happen nowadays,
No.
obviously.
Yeah.
But
So he actually saw, while he was in prison, he saw
Yes.
he witnessed the execution.
Have either of you heard of To a Wreath of Snow by Emily Bronte? This poem is about a prisoner in a dungeon, that's what it reminded me when you were talking about.
Oh.
I've never heard of it, but I will.
I might have read it, but way back when. Do you have it there?
I've got the link.
Ooh, right. I must admit, when I was looking, I was thinking about, because you remember when we were talking about Victorian crime, and I think I read out a bit of one of the poems that were written. Was it about the Mannings?
Yes.
Those like staggeringly inept criminals. But it used to be quite a thing that, there will be poems and things written about these people, because it was a sort of a form of journalism, which was like highly strange. But apparently broadside ballads were part of what was termed street literature. They were descriptive or narrative songs, commonly in a simple ballad form on a popular theme. They were printed on broadside, sometimes called broadsheets, which is really confusing because now if we say broadsheet, you think of like the Times or the Telegraph or the Guardian or something like that.
But broadsheets was very much what Charles Dickens.
Yeah,
his serials were broadsheets, weren't they? Back in the day.
And they illustrated them with woodcuts, and they were usually done on one side of paper because the point is they were designed to be posted up on walls like posters. So they'd be distributed by peddlers and hawkers and street criers who'd buy them from the printers and then sell them on the streets. And this article I'm reading, which is I think part of the University of Northampton's archive, they were saying that our mutual friend Charles Dickens includes Silas Wegg, who's a one-legged man selling ballads on street corners. But they were saying these things were like the tabloids of their day.
Yeah, well, they would be, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
When you think about
so the love of the sensational, like if there was an execution or a catastrophe, then it would be there would be a ballad about it. And it crime was really popular.
Yes.
In the way that it is now, but they also covered all sorts of other things like politics and tragedy and royalty and things like that. But they were like half a penny or a penny a piece, and they were basically
penny dreadfuls. Is that the same thing?
I think they came a bit later.
As a follow-on sort of.
Yeah, 'cause
okay.
I think they were more sort of serialised things
Yes,
that
they
you
were,
could
weren't
get
they?
hold
Yeah.
of. But yeah, I mean, they were really the main things that the working class or the lower middle class would have read because they were within their budgets.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It's funny going off on a tangent. No, I know we never do this.
As
Go
if.
off on a tangent. But last week, my wife and I were in Grange over Sands for a few days, and the shop. There's a house there as you go into Grange from the station, which has a little notice board by their front gate.
Yeah.
And every day they put a poem up.
Oh.
This when did I see it? Wednesday, Thursday last week. It was a sonnet, one of Shakespeare's sonnets.
Oh, very nice.
But they put a different poem up.
When I worked at the hospital in Barrow, they had a poem in the lift. They had a little window, with glass, and and they asked people to put poems in this so people could read them while they were in the lift. The only thing is you're never in the lift long enough there to... It's only got a couple of floors. So, you'd have to go up and down in the lift quite a few times. But I thought the idea was nice.
Yeah, kind of like Poems on the Underground.
Yes,
much
of
shorter
course.
form.
Yeah, that sort of thing. So,
Shall I bring us in a bit of gore?
Go on then.
A bit of gore?
Yes, please.
Now, this poem was written, only an excerpt, but this was written by Robert Browning in 1836. And I can't say that. Liz, any ideas?
Porphyria's Lover.
Oh, there we are. Porphyria's Lover. And it's a dramatic monologue in which the speaker strangles his lover and believes she is grateful for him.
I had real trouble with Browning.
That moment she was mine fair, perfectly pure and good. I found a thing to do, and all her hair in one long yellow string I wound 3 times her little throat around, and strangled her. No pain felt she. I am quite sure she felt no pain.
Oh.
I've still got a problem with Browning.
Yeah.
After that.
Well,
or a more modern one, A Case of Murder. Now, Carol and Liz are both cat people, so they're going to enjoy this one. This was A Case of Murder, written by Vernon Scannell in 1974, so we're coming up to more. It's a disturbing poem about a child who kills a cat.
What?
Exploring themes of violence and guilt. And again, just an excerpt.
I can't believe we're allowing this, Carol.
They should not have left him there alone, that is, except for the cat. He was only 9, not old enough to be left alone in a basement flat.
Psychopath in the making.
Yes, I'm hoping the cat gets him.
Sorry, I want to say. I've got here, this is another one I've never heard of. A refusal to mourn the death by fire of a child in London by Dylan Thomas.
I know this one.
Do you?
I do.
I don't.
Well, we did Dylan Thomas as part of English A level, so yes, I remember this. Go on, read us a bit.
The link isn't opening.
Oh, I'm disappointed now.
While Carol's looking for the link,
go on.
Lizzie Borden.
Oh yes,
poem,
with an axe.
With an axe. It's a dark nursery rhyme.
That's photo.
Oh, that's why it won.
Lizzie Borden, the infamous Lizzie Borden. Who was Lizzie Borden?
I don't. Do you know the poem?
I know. I've got an excerpt. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks.
Yes.
And when she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41.
Yep, that's exactly what she did. I think she was, she lived with her parents, and I think they were very restrictive, and I think eventually she just snapped.
It goes back to what you were saying, because I think this is Anonymous, written in 1892, so
yes,
it's going back to that sort of, I suppose, Victorian era, where it's a bit later than is it a bit late?
It's still Victorian, because Victorian's until 1901.
Yeah,
1901. That's Queen Vic. That's when she died.
It's again about how they used to use poems and ballads to almost highlight these crimes or make them in such a way that they could dramatise them for
well, when we were talking about YouTube Shorts,
yes,
and how lots of people like listening or watching them because they don't have that much time, short attention span, maybe they just want a little snippet. And something like that is easy to assimilate, and also the rhythm.
Yes, rhythm, yeah. And
and
it tells a story.
It's like when you learn a mnemonic or a little rhyme, like 30 days have September, April, June, and November, etc., etc. And it's a way to fix it. And I think also with a lot of these kind of ballad type things, they would say, oh, it goes to this tune, and they'd name a popular tune so that if you really wanted, you could sing it.
Yeah.
You know, but people did that. It seems like utterly strange nowadays, but we still love poems, as evidenced by Poems on the Underground, Poems in a Lift, Poems on a Notice Board.
It's a bit like, what was it? There was a rhyme, wasn't there? Remember the 5th of November.
Gunpowder, treason and plot.
Yeah.
There you go.
30 days has September, April, June and November. All the rest have 31, except in February alone. It's 28 days, 29 each leap year.
Yes, unless you do the Brian Bilston version, which ends, excepting for January, which has 6,542. Similar. And I do feel like that. I was thinking, how can any month be this long?
So, it's gone again.
But again, the November the 5th one is highlighting a crime.
Yes.
You know, it's a way of remembering a crime.
Yeah.
I didn't realise that after going off on a tangent again, after the discovery of the plot, which was the attempt to kill the king and most of Parliament, wasn't it? Was it Charles? King?
Probably.
I think it was.
Probably.
Apparently the king afterwards insisted on November the 5th being a public holiday so that people could remember how he had thwarted the plot.
First public holiday, yeah.
It's turned on its head now, sort of remembering. Now I don't think the idea was to make Guy Fawkes the famous goody. And we tend to see him now more as infamous,
probably. Yeah.
But maybe also the king decided, well, if I give them all a holiday, they'll think better of me for it.
Could be that as well.
You know, if he killed me, it would not have been a public holiday. So there you go.
So I've got here the refusal to mourn the death by fire of a child in London. So I'll just do a couple of verses.
Oh yes.
Never until the mankind making birds, beasts and flowers, fathering and all humbling darkness, tells the silence, the last light breaking, and the still hour. It come of the sea tumbling in harness, and I must enter again the round Zion of the water bead, and the synagogue of the ear corn shall I let pray the shadow of a sound, or sow my salt seed in the last valley of sackcloth to mourn. Don't understand a word of it. Does that make me a bad person?
Not at all.
But I think that's it, isn't it? It's you either think, oh, that's really good, and you understand every word of it, or you say to yourself, I didn't understand that.
No.
And I think that's the thing about the kind of the poems, you know, the Lizzie Borden poem and the other ones, they're very, very accessible. Yeah. I've got one here, which is 7 verses above a long prose account of the crime and execution of Nathaniel Mobbs. There's a whole collection of these collected by a guy called Paul Slade, on a website called planetslade, I think, .com. And apparently these verses are presented as the criminal's last confession, complete with a moralising conclusion warning others not to follow his sad example. Supposedly written by the condemned man, these last goodnights were actually penned by jobbing writers in the print shops round Seven Dials and sold on the day of the execution, so there were ghost writers even then, even before the guy was a ghost.
Yes.
But yes, they're saying the illustration's a very popular one. It appears on at least a dozen broadsides in the British Library's collection. Oh, someone's delivering some poems for us.
Somebody at the door.
There is. And apparently the illustration says Newgate Prison on the right and St Sepulchre's Church on the left. And it begins, "The fatal moments have arrived, my wretched breast it throbs, and no one seems to sympathise with poor Nathaniel Mobbs. A loving wife I murdered, base, inhuman, barbarously, for which, this fatal Monday morn, I die upon a tree." And the chorus is, "Oh, what numbers flock to see Mobbs die upon the fatal tree." There you go.
Oh.
I know. And the last verse, "O men, I pray a warning take by my unhappy fate, and think upon Nathaniel Mobbs before it is too late. Shun drunkenness and jealousy, remember one and all, those awful deeds the world may read have proven my downfall."
Do you understand this one?
but the important thing, I think, of this, it's a bit like before there was written books. there were stories. There were
Yeah.
storytellers who went around the country telling
They did,
stories.
yeah.
And these ballads and these folk songs are a bit the same. They're taking an event and it travels the country through folk singers, through ballad singers. You know, they're telling stories through singing and what have you. I mean, I've got one here, Frankie and Johnny, this one's called.
Ah, yes.
And it's based on a woman who shot her unfaithful lover. I won't read it all, I'll just read some of it. Johnny saw Frankie a-coming. Out the back door did he scoot. But Frankie took aim with her pistol, and the gun went root-a-toot-toot. He was her man, but he done her wrong. Oh, roll me over so easy, roll me over so slow. Roll me over easy, boys, 'cause my wounds, they hurt me so. I was her man, but I done her wrong. Bring out your long black coffin, bring out your funeral clothes. Johnny's gone and cashed his checks. To the graveyard Johnny goes. He was a man, but he done her wrong. And you can imagine that with that repeating line. Yeah.
Yeah, although I'm not sure a gun going root-a-toot-toot sounds
No,
particularly
no,
menacing.
no.
It's rather jolly.
But it rhymed with scoot.
Yes. I mean, they must have been so pleased that a guy called Nathaniel Mobbs died because
Died,
there's so many rhymes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can just imagine these guys in the basement like, oh, who have we got today?
Well, that's right.
Well, Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie was, she liked to write poetry. There's the Ballad of Bonnie and Clyde, which I'm trying to find now.
So did she actually write it?
She wrote this, yeah. And I used to know it off by hand. That's a bit sad, isn't it? Talk among yourselves.
Well, why do you find that? There's another Scottish ballad about jealousy and murder called The Two Sisters. But this one you could almost picture as a folk song. You can imagine people singing it. One verse goes a bit like this: a farmer there lived in the North Country, a hey ho me bonny o, and he had two daughters, one, two, three. The swans swim so bonny o. Those daughters they walked by the river's brim, and hey ho me bonny o. The eldest pushed the youngest in. The swans swim so bonny o. And you can see that somebody's having a chorus, sort of developing a song and fitting in the older daughter, the older.
And I suppose the other thing is, if you're listening, you can start joining in with the bits about the swans.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
And
it's like
at the
a
same
call
time,
and response thing.
Yeah. At the same time, they're telling the story of these two sisters.
I've been told.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I found another one here, which was about a gang who were like prototypical Peaky Blinders.
Oh,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. So from Birmingham. And apparently this was kindly supplied by West Midlands Police Museum. So there you go, they're in on it as well. Apparently it was produced by Thomas Sansom's Birmingham Print Shop, which gave it the full title, Corkery's Farewell to His Mother, Brother and Sisters. And it comes from 1875, which Paul Slade said is very unusual because the thing is, by then there weren't any public hangings.
Right.
All that took place in the prison yard. So kind of, I imagine, like Oscar Wilde's experience, the public wouldn't have seen it.
The prisoners would, yes.
But yeah, it says this deprived ballad sellers of one of their major marketplaces for verses like these, because obviously if you had a public hanging, there'd be lots and lots of people there wanting to be entertained while they waited, so there'd be a really good market for these sheets. So it says the fact that Sansom thought it was worth producing a ballad sheet at all tells us the case must have generated a lot of public interest. And the chorus goes, oh, my poor mother dear, for your son just shed a tear, and think of me when I am far away. My brother, sisters too, I hope will be kind to you till we all meet on that great judgment day. There's, oh wow, there appears to be some drunkenness going on. Foul Satan and his imps attend everyone who drinks. That's bad news for me. But moderation is a maxim true. For men forsake their home, and women too will roam, and for wicked crimes then some are made to rue. Paul Questwell and Charles Mee, Thomas Leonard, now you see, and Thomas Whalen they have sent for life. For men in youth and bloom, perhaps to meet their doom, pray think upon it and avoid such strife. There you go. So it doesn't really say what they did at all in this, because I've kind of skipped over all of it, but it doesn't say what they did at all. It's just, they've done bad things, they've been sentenced, and it's terrible, and, don't follow this path. So it's really quite circumspect in a way, apart from the hint that, there was drink taken. I
Imagine.
know.
Well, the
Bonnie and Clyde.
Bonnie and Clyde, the Ballad of Bonnie and Clyde, or the story of suicide. It's quite long, so I'm just going to read you the end bit.
Oh, yes.
If they try to act like citizens and rent a nice flat, about the third night they're invited to fight by a sub-guns rat-a-tat-tat, which is what you just said. They don't think that they're tough or desperate. They know the law always wins. But they've been shot at before, but they do not ignore that death is the wages of sins. Someday they'll go down together and be buried side by side. To few it'll be grief, to the law a relief, but it's death for Bonnie and Clyde. And that was in the film of Bonnie and Clyde. She read the whole thing out. But she did write a lot of poetry because she suffered quite badly from depression. The life she led, I'm not surprised really. You know, so yeah, that's, and I've got a piece here that is actual. This isn't fiction. This is something that really happened that I'd never heard of. It's funny what you get when you Google, isn't it?
It is,
Oh, the things you find.
Yeah, so Night of the Murdered Poets. 12th of August 1952, 13 renowned Jewish writers, artists, journalists and scientists were killed by a firing squad at the Lubyanka prison. This was one of Starling's last crimes before he died 6 months later. So they were there because I think A, they were Jewish, and B, they had they were artistic, for whatever reasons, and they were probably saying things against his regime.
I imagine they were free thinking
and these people had been held in prison for quite a considerable time and been tortured before they actually executed them. You know, so it's like it's dying for your art, isn't it? Literally.
I've got another one here, more modern one. Carol Ann Duffy.
Oh yes, we all know her.
1985, called Education for Leisure, and again just an excerpt. But apparently this poem delves into the mind of an individual who feels overlooked and contemplates committing acts of violence. And it just simply says, or this excerpt says, "Today I'm going to kill something, anything. I've had enough of being ignored, and today I'm going to play God."
Ooh.
And yet, you see, to me, that's a it's two sentences.
Yeah, and it evokes a lot.
I suppose it's prose poetry, isn't it? It's been broken up into 3 lines, and it could have just been read out as a couple of sentences. So there's that distinction between what's poetry,
what isn't poetry.
what isn't poetry. That's a fine line.
The things that I've been reading out are very clearly, you know, they're in ballad meter.
Yes.
They rhyme.
They could be sung.
Yeah,
they?
well, they're all meant to be
Yeah.
something that you could, you know, set to music. Because I was reading up about it, and they said, you know, ballads and stuff like that was one of the key ways that ideas were exchanged.
Yeah, and as
back
Mike
in
was
the
saying,
17th century.
that's how news travelled around the country as well.
Yeah.
By that way, I mean, I remember going in, not in this country. I remember going into a church when I was on holiday once, and it having huge, beautiful pictures of different events in the Bible. And the person taking us around said this was so the illiterate could be taught about Christ and the church's followings and everything, because they couldn't read, and B, if they could read, they couldn't afford to buy books. So again, it's a different way of getting the message out there. That's what that was, wasn't it? It was telling people what had been happening. Yeah,
I see that too. Some of our favourite detectives, Agatha and Sherlock Holmes, have both used poetry in some, or nursery rhymes. So in Agatha Christie, you've got A Pocket Full of Rye.
Yes, I remember that one.
Inspired by a singer-song of Sixpence. And the other one is One, Two, Buckle My Shoe. Sherlock Holmes apparently was influenced by poetry. I'm sure I read somewhere he wrote a lot of poetry too. He wrote short stories, and I think he wrote a lot of poetry. When we were doing Conan Doyle. Conan Doyle wrote a lot of poetry. And apparently the Musgrave ritual uses an old poem as a riddle leading to hidden treasure and murder. So I don't know the Musgrave ritual.
I will have read it, but I couldn't tell you. I tend to prefer the early ones.
Yes.
So
yeah.
So, have you ever used poetry in your work, Carol?
Have I used poetry in my work? I think there's a couple of little lines here and there, especially in one of the murder detectives.
Mm-hmm.
Whether I wrote them, they might actually be quotes from the Bible and things like that as well. So no, I can't think of any, to be honest with you. I definitely have used, 2 or 3 lines that could be a poem.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, that's it, isn't it? I mean, I think of some of the short stories I've written, something like the 100-word stories. I suppose it wouldn't be a great
leap
to turn those into
what sort of free verse?
Yeah.
And you might kind
poetry,
of re-engineer some.
It's a re-engineering, isn't it? It's about breaking up the lines and putting them into verses of some description.
Yes. Well, considering I didn't think we'd have much to talk about.
Well, I was just thinking of one of the characters in one of my books is a poet, which I regretted almost the minute I thought about it, because I'm going to write some poetry.
But which one?
In past tense, the 6th Pippa Parker book. And there's a character called Clementina Stoat.
The poet, and it's a clue, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yes, I remember that.
There's a poem that she wrote, and no one understands it.
That's right, yeah. I remember
and then,
that.
Yeah, Pippa manages to work it out with a bit of yes. But I mean, luckily she wasn't a very good poet, so that made things a bit easier. So, but yes, there's another character that is a decent poet. But and also when I was writing with Paula, the Castor and Fleet books, quite often when they were in the music hall, obviously there'd be songs sung, and you'd have to write lyrics and things, which was a bit of a stretch. So.
It's still poetry though, isn't it?
Yes, but it's very much more in the ballad meter line than the Dylan Thomas lines.
So. I've had a message from the kitchen to say there's tea brewing. There's tea brewing.
Oh well.
So goodbye everybody. Thank you.
Well, everything does, tend to stop for tea.
Yes. Yeah, so, are we? Has anybody else got anything they'd like to add to this?
I think we've been fairly comprehensive about how poetry and crime surprisingly can go hand in hand. Yes,
and it would be interesting if any of our readers out there who are avid poets or avid readers of poetry, which obviously you've probably gathered we aren't. Have any examples that you'd like to add in the comments? We'd love to read about them.
Yeah.
And,
I must admit, I've got some lovely books, poetry books in my bookshelves, just so that people think I'm well educated.
Does it work?
No.
No.
Well, there you go. Right, so we'll call it a day, and we'll see you. No, we won't see you. We'll be with you next week at this time, and until then, bye-bye from me.
And from me.
And from both of them.
You have been listening to Only Murders in My Mind, a Random Thought production, produced by John Bissett. The music in Peril was composed and recorded by OM Studio Strings.